Hi guys, and welcome to another episode here at Transform Your Body TV. My name is Paul, and today's episode I'm going to be talking to Colin Nwadike, an MMA trainer, fighter and coach, on the benefits of MMA training for cardio and strength building. So I hope you enjoy. Yeah, so Colin, thanks for agreeing to do this today, give everyone a bit of a deeper view into MMA, mixed martial arts.
Yeah, no problem.
To start things off, really, I just wanted to ask you, can you give a deeper view into what exactly mixed martial arts is? Because I know I found out personally myself. I heard it on UFC. It's the first I ever heard of mixed martial arts. People being described as a mixed martial artist. But what does that exactly mean? What do you need to have done to be classed as a mixed martial artist?
Well, mixed martial arts is pretty much exactly what it says in the tin. It's a sport which combines different martial arts to make one. Now, if I was to break it down with regards to the most common sports, we'd probably look at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, Muay Thai or Thai boxing, and wrestling. Okay, so these are the four main components with regards to martial arts which make up MMA. There's, of course, I mean, the very nature of the sport and the very nature of the name means that there's any number of martial arts could make up the skills for the sport. But if I was to break it down as to the most common and as to the fundamental sports which make up MMA, I'd say it's those four. Now, okay. If I was to go back and give you a little bit of a history lesson for MMA, the current sport of MMA, or as we know it, under the unified rules, have been in effect since the year 2000. The unified rules are basically the commonly accepted rules for mixed martial arts as a sport globally. There's got to be a few variations here and there, but generally accepted since the year 2000. The rules were basically passed by the California State Athletic Commission, and prior to that, the UFC existed. The UFC's been in existence since 1993. But prior to that, it wasn't as well regulated. It was a very different sport. People you wouldn't necessarily call them mixed martial artists as such. I mean, it was more sort of styles versus styles thing. So that was going back to 1993, which was the start of mixed martial arts. 2000 since the start of the modern game, which we know now. But if I was to go even further back in time from that, I mean, the Brazilians had a sport called vale tudo, which literally means anything goes in Portuguese, and that's something they've been doing, and that's been part of their culture since the 1920s. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, as a result, is a sport that's grown from that very competitive nature of vale tudo. Vale tudo, similarities to modern MMA, a lot more brutal. Right. It doesn't have all of the rules in place which modern MMA has.
Are there things you're not allowed to do then in MMA?
Sorry?
Are there many things you're not allowed to do in MMA?
In MMA? Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of rules in MMA. I think the biggest thing, which is different from vale tudo, is weight divisions. Secondly, the fact that in MMA you wear gloves, 4-ounce fingerless gloves, which are pretty standard, and there's a number of other things. Vale tudo was bare knuckle. There's no time limits either, so there wasn't rounds.
Oh wow, just knockout.
Well, yeah, so someone couldn't continue, okay. And there was headbutts and various other things, which basically, which it wouldn't sit too well nowadays. If I was to go even further back in time, I mean, if we was to go to sort of the Greek Olympic Games, the early games, going back to sort of 648 BC, we had a sport called pancration, which was an Olympic sport and was basically the early forerunner to MMA, which was basically a sport which combined wrestling and boxing.
Okay.
So that's in a nutshell is what MMA is. That's where it came from. That's its kind of history, and that's where we are today with the modern sport.
Oh wow, great detail. Good. I didn't know it went back so far.
Sure.
As 6 BC there. But you say about different styles. Some from the little bit I know, some are more upright and some are more ground-based. Is that just to be more well-rounded?
Absolutely. I mean, to compete in a modern sport, you have to be competent in all those areas. So that's in the clinch, that's your wrestling game, and your sort of Thai clinch, that sort of close range fighting. On the ground, you're grappling, so your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you need to have a strong submission game. And even if you don't have a strong submission game, you need to know what someone who does have a strong submission game is doing, or what they're trying to set up.
Oh, right.
So even if you're not necessarily a submission artist yourself, you certainly need to know what's coming, you need to know how to avoid them, you need to know how to counter them. So for that respect, you know, you do need to have that knowledge on the ground as well. And stand up, of course. I mean, you need to be competent in all ranges. I mean, nowadays the sport has evolved so much. The athletes are so high level that if you're missing in any one area, you will get found out. I mean, that is pretty much the nature of the sport now. You know, it didn't used to be like that so much in the past, but certainly nowadays, you need to be on point in all areas, you know, to compete at the highest levels anyway.
Oh wow! So you can tell if somebody is lacking when you start fighting them in certain areas.
For sure. I mean, to a certain extent, you know, you're always going to have people who specialise. You know, not everyone's going to be a great striker. I mean, the modern sport of MMA, especially if you look at the Americans, a lot of them would have had a background in, say, wrestling, because that's part of their culture anyway. They do it through high school and college and so on and so forth. You know, so a lot of them, you know, so if you've come from a wrestling background, for the most part, that's going to be your MMA style. You're going to be someone who wrestles, you know. So people are always going to have biases, you know, in a similar sort of way. Someone who's come from a boxing or a kickboxing background, their bias is going to be to strike. That's not to say they can't learn the skills and cross over fully, but, you know, people will definitely have preferences in strong areas.
Of course.
You know. And then you've also got some of these new generation of kids. I think the perfect example, which I think gets banded around quite a lot, but Rory McDonald. He's a Canadian welterweight MMA fighter, and I mean, his story is pretty incredible because he's one of the generation of kids who've grown up just doing MMA. He didn't wrestle in high school.
Okay.
Didn't have any other martial arts background, so he's grown up basically learning the skills from MMA from the start. So he started learning the wrestling, the BJJ, the Thai, and everything from day dot. So to a certain extent, you know, that put him at an advantage.
No weak areas, is that? No
weak areas, and no bad habits either.
Oh, okay.
You know, sometimes you can have a bias which you carry over from the other sport. You know, which could prove you know, a hindrance. So yeah.
Of course. Okay, that's cool. That's great. So how did you get started in MMA? Because you've been going about, you said 25 years. You've been training now.
Well, not MMA for 25 years.
Oh, right, okay.
But martial arts, yeah, for sure. I started off doing a little known style of Kung Fu called Lion Style Kung Fu when I was 9 years old. And that was in Brixton. And I trained that on the weekends. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, I really loved training there. Unfortunately, my instructor had to move away, and he basically left the club. I couldn't actually carry on, so I had to stop doing the Kung Fu. And I think a couple of years later, I found a Taekwondo club, so I started doing Taekwondo for a little bit. It wasn't really my thing, and I don't think it was necessarily down to the fact that Taekwondo wasn't my thing, but I just don't think the club, you know, I don't think I necessarily enjoyed that training environment. A couple of years after that, I met a friend of mine, a good friend of mine called Terry, and he told me his dad was a karate instructor. So he invited me down to go and train with his dad, which the style was Shotokan karate, and straight away, as soon as I joined, I mean, I loved it. You know, and I was training there sort of religiously, and you know, before long I was competing, winning competitions, winning trophies. So really enjoyed that experience, doing Shotokan karate for a few years. From there, I sort of transitioned into boxing. So I started going down to my local boxing gym and basically training there. Boxing. And then from there, I went off to university. University, I wasn't too active with regards to, you know, I was sort of more involved in the university lifestyle.
Yeah.
When I got back, I started training Muay Thai boxing. So I was training there for a few years. And I got introduced to a friend of mine called Raymond. through another mutual friend, and basically he, you know, we hit it off straight away, you know, because he's from a martial arts background as well. And I actually went around to his house, and the first thing I noticed, he had loads of magazines for MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I started flicking through those, and prior to that, the only time I'd really seen MMA was the really early UFCs, the sort of 1993, 1994. So the first thing that struck me going through these magazines was basically how much the sport had changed and how much it had evolved. I mean, it's quite obvious that, you know, you had people who now became mixed martial artists. You know, you had the weight divisions, you had various champions, not just one champion. You know, the whole thing with gloves. So straight away I noticed that the sport had changed a lot. Then I started watching a lot of his DVDs. He had a lot of the Pride, which was a big show in Japan, DVDs. He also had the UFCs, the more modern ones. And similarly, he also was a big fan of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it was via him. I mean, I'd kind of known about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from the early UFCs and watching the Royce Gracie win the early tournaments. So I'd kind of known about it, but that was about the extent of my knowledge. And it's through kind of watching and basically going through his magazines, seeing what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was, and finding out he actually trained himself. And he invited me down to come down to his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club. This was probably about 2002, 2003. So I went along, started training for a bit, had an injury, dislocated my shoulder, which I was just doing some forward rows, and it was an ongoing injury. It was an injury that I'd had since from playing rugby for many years. So it was something I hadn't had addressed at the time, and you know, so I dislocated my shoulder. So I kind of had to stop training there. Went back to training a few months later, but I actually found out that the place where I trained my Thai boxing actually had a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school there as well.
Oh, cool.
So it kind of made sense. So what I was doing, I started doubling up and going from my Thai boxing, and straight afterwards would be the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class. So I really got into that, and you know, loved it. Started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu religiously for a couple of years. Then it started getting difficult for me because of work commitments and distance between the club and where I lived. So I was getting home far too late. You know, so I kind of had to knock the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on the head. You know, so the whole time I was thinking to myself, what can I do? What can I do? Is there any clubs near me? And there wasn't really. But what I did actually find, I found an MMA club, which was basically sort of 10 minutes from where I lived.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I went along one day, went in there, had a look, and the person who's running the class, at the time it's quite a small club, but the person who's running the club actually turned out to be Nico Shipzak. Nico Shipzak is a British MMA fighter who basically appeared on Series 9 of The Ultimate Fighter, which is the UK versus US.
Oh, right.
Basically went on to have a number of fights in the UFC. So this is all prior to his MMA career in the UFC. You know, so he was pretty much just starting off. He went on to have a very successful career. So I actually went along and watched the session. Went home again. Didn't come back again for a few weeks. I had stuff doing. And then I actually just turned up one day and decided to train. I remember Nick saying to me, I didn't think you was coming back. I said, yeah, I was always going to come back, you know. So, and that was it. And from there, I basically just started training with Nico Shipzak. And I was training with him for a number of years until he decided to leave the country in 2012, late 2012, to go traveling with his girlfriend. So he actually spoke to me and another student of his called Christian Avaldi, the other guy who basically runs New Wave Academy with me. I'm sure we'll get to that. And basically said, you know, he wants us to actually take over the club and run it.
Oh, great.
You know.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've had quite. You didn't set out to do mixed martial arts. It just kind of happened along the way as you were learning different styles. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it was quite fitting because of the fact that by the time I actually started doing mixed martial arts, I'd built up quite a sort of strong skill base. From doing a sort of lot of the individual components anyway. So for me, it was kind of was like a natural fit. You know, I could strike. I've been doing striking since I was a kid. I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a few years, you know, so I knew a bit about the ground. So yeah, for me, it just made sort of perfect sense, and it just kind of all fell together. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it sounds like you've got what 4 or 5 or 6 different skills there in martial arts that make up quite well. Sounds like a very well-rounded game.
I'll try. I mean, one thing about martial arts is that, you know, you don't ever stop learning, you don't ever stop growing, you don't ever stop developing. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. So you had a couple of fights last year, didn't you?
2012. Had 3 fights in 2012.
Ah, 2012.
So, yeah, I mean, it was a bit crazy, the fact that I trained so much. I had all this knowledge. I was teaching classes. I was actually, you know, coaching fighters, but I wasn't actually fighting myself. Not in MMA. I mean, I'd done plenty of competitions in a lot of the other sports, a lot of the other martial arts I'd done, but not in MMA. And, you know, I always try to analyze why this was happening. And a big problem for me was the fact that, I mean, my professional career, my professional job was just taking up so much time, you know. And for me, if I wanted to compete in MMA, you know, I didn't want to go into it sort of half-heartedly.
Yeah.
You know, if I was going to train and prepare for it, you know, it's going to be something that I actually did 110%, you know. So I didn't really like the idea with the fact that, you know, I was working I was in the office 12, 14 hours a day, training at best twice a week. You know, for me, that wasn't enough. You know, I couldn't do that. And plus, you know, that sort of repetitive office sort of work hard, play hard lifestyle, you know, it takes its toll on you. So what I actually did was I actually decided to quit my job. So I took a year off work, and during that year I basically decided to get really fit and dedicate myself to actually having some matches. You know, so I dropped a whole load of weight. I started training pretty much every day like a professional.
Wow.
3 times a day, strength and conditioning coach, Muay Thai coach, working my boxing, working my wrestling in different places, and went out and basically had 3 fights in 2012. Won them all, you know. So that was pretty good. And then from there, I kind of thought, okay, well, I've done that now. I'm kind of happy, sort of just training and coaching.
Yeah.
You know, you never know. I mean, I might get back in there. I mean, when the need takes me, when I feel like a real desire to get back in and compete in MMA, I'll be happy to.
Well, it sounds like it was a natural progression. You're teaching classes, you know, with all your previous skill base, to then move into having some fights, and, you know, fantastic. You can win them all, you know. But being able to take the year off work and train every day is obviously a level of dedication that you need to going into, you know, a fight where kind of only one guy is walking out. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly my attitude towards it, and it's an attitude which I try to instill in my students as well. I mean, not all the students, you know, but certainly the ones who wish to compete.
Yeah. Tell us about that. You're a head coach at New Wave Academy.
Yeah. So New Wave Academy. So we're based in Southeast London, Crystal Palace, and it's myself and Christian Nwadike. Christian was the other guy who basically Nick, another student of Nick Shipzak's, long-term student, and when Nick left the country, he basically gave the club to us. I mean, I think that's the most simple way of putting it. He literally gave the club to us and said, "Right, it's yours now. Take it forward. You know, do what you need to do." So, I mean, it's a great club. Absolutely love the guys and girls down there. It's a real sort of family atmosphere, really close knit. You know, we train really hard. You know, we help each other out, and we've got a number of top professional, semi-pro and amateur fighters, as well as a number of casual sort of keep fitters and, you know, people who just want to learn the skills. So it's a good mix. It's a good...
it sounds like a good mix. Yeah, that's great. So what does a session consist of then if you're training MMA at New Wave Academy? What would if I come down to a session tomorrow, what would happen? Apart from me getting thrown around.
I mean, it varies. I mean, it varies on what we're doing on a particular day. But if I was to give you a sort of typical session, a typical session would last 2 hours, and we'd probably spend about 15 to 20 minutes warming up. So that would basically involve a bit of fitness work, a bit of mobility work, and also some sort of specific drills which are relevant to positions or skills which are needed in MMA. So that would be probably the first 20 minutes. Then the rest of the class will probably be split into two halves of 45 minutes. Typically, the first half would work some grappling. So that could be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, going through some techniques, be it submissions, escapes, sweeps, whatever else, or some wrestling. So we do some drilling for probably about 20 minutes or so. I'd go through some techniques, or Christian, whoever's teaching on the day, we'll go through some techniques. We'll get the students drilling it. I'd go around, make sure everything's going well, and then we'll probably spend the last 15 minutes of that 45 minutes doing some sparring. So that'd be sparring, which would be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu sparring, or some wrestling sparring. Sometimes we'll make the sparring scenario based on what we've just been drilling in the techniques.
Okay.
Just to make sure we're making use of those new skills. And so that would typically be the first half of the class. The second half of the class would be striking. So that could be boxing or Thai boxing skills, which would work on. And it would work in a very similar sort of format with regards to going through some techniques, drilling, just working those various skills, just partnering up and making sure everybody's working hard, drilling, learning. And then maybe the last 15 minutes, once again, we'll transition into sparring. So that'd be a typical session with regards to, and of course at the end of that we'll warm down.
Yeah.
So that'd be a typical session. On different days we'll work on different things. Like some days we dedicate just to strength conditioning, some days we dedicate just to grappling, some days we dedicate just to MMA sparring. But if I was to give you an idea of what our general classes are like, that's how it would break down.
Okay, that sounds so pretty well rounded, especially with the warming up at the beginning. I'd need a lot of that if I was to come down. Very inflexible, but practicing that, say, 2-hour session is a long session, so you must get lots of work out of him in that amount of time.
Oh yeah, I mean it's great fun. But the thing is, to be fair, you don't really notice the time going. I mean, certainly as someone who teaches, the time just flies by. I mean, I enjoy teaching so much, but I'm sure it's a similar sort of feeling for the students. It doesn't feel like 2 hours. It goes before you know it. So.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of when they're actually training, I want to talk about the kind of cardiovascular aspect of it, as opposed to something like running or cycling or swimming, something that maybe someone listening to this might be doing on a regular basis to get their cardiovascular work in. How do you find that compares with yourself and with your students with mixed martial arts?
I mean, what you'd call sort of traditional cardiovascular workout would be sort of, like you mentioned, running, cycling, the sort of typical aerobic exercises. One thing about MMA, it's a very sort of anaerobic sport. It's a sport that puts a lot of challenges on your ability to sort of breathe and to catch your breath. You're working in very short bursts, very intense, very short bursts. So, and even when you're kind of not working in those sort of bursts, you're still actively working. So even your recovery periods are still doing something. There's a chance, you're fighting, you're sparring, whatever else. So even when you're not actually working, you're still using your footwork, you're still avoiding. Maybe you're still attacking, but maybe not with the same intensity. So it kind of tends to go in bursts. So your training has to kind of reflect that. Doing sort of traditional cardio, which is traditionally known as sort of being quite steady state, it's not gonna serve you too well in MMA. Your training needs to be specific for the sort of sport you do. So jogging, you'd probably do a lot less of that. In fact, I mean, if I was to give advice, you probably wouldn't do any jogging. With regards to running, I mean, the focus for MMA should be on sprints, and building up that sort of endurance and recovery. So sprint work, hill sprints, anything like that. I mean, basically, you don't want to just be doing something where you're kind of just like methodically going through.
Yeah, that usual steady, slow-paced cardio a lot of people do.
Of course, because that's not how you fight in MMA. So your training's got to reflect that. And so with regards to cardio, sprints, but your work should just generally be explosive. I mean, if I was to sort of elaborate on the sort of training which is suitable for an MMA guy, you are really looking at sort of high intensity interval training, tabata training, so anything which basically forces you to work sort of at maximum output for quite short periods of time, and even your recovery time is involves work. So if I was to say you are going to do any jogging, it's while you're sprinting and while you're jogging back to your starting point again, ready to sprint again. That's and that for me is probably the most useful application of traditional jogging in MMA. But gosh, I mean, one thing about MMA, it's a sport which has grown with the internet age. So as a result, the growth of the internet, the growth of and the sharing of knowledge of cutting edge training techniques, MMA has always been at the forefront of that, because it's actually grown, with that sort of increased knowledge and that increased awareness about training methods and training techniques, and so a big part of MMA training would be to focus on what's known as sort of functional fitness.
Oh right, okay.
Functional fitness. If I was to give an example of some things which are fantastic. I mean, the reason why it's functional is they're functional because they make your body work in functional ways. You're not just kind of lying on a bench pressing something, sort of thing. It's not really functional movement there. For MMA, your body works and moves in unconventional ways. So you need to do training, even when you're doing a strength conditioning, which kind of reflects that. So I'm a big fan and advocate of kettlebells. Kettlebells, things such as battle ropes. For those who are not familiar with battle ropes, those sort of typically sort of big sort of naval type of ropes. Kind of work them for sort of periods, sort of up and down and both hands, and sort of which are a great workout. Workout. Things such as Bulgarian bags, which are those sort of horseshoe shaped leather sort of bags, which you can use to sort of swing around your head, around your body, so it's great for actually engaging core stability, in terms of actually keeping your body upright while you're swinging that thing around. Things such as TRXs, I mean, sprinting, burpees, hammers, so in terms of, I've probably seen it with the sledgehammer and the sort of big tire.
Of course,
these are typical sort of training techniques of an MMA guy.
So very much functional training then. No fixed movements in one plane of motion like a lot of the typical gym equipment that is in a regular gym, shall we say. Very functional.
I'm not saying there's no room for that. I mean, I think people are always. I think doing traditional sort of deadlifting is. I think there's always a benefit to someone having that in their regime. But I mean, if you to actually just walk into a bog standard gym and basically start using the sort of machinery and equipment which is lying around for the purpose of your MMA training, I mean, you'll have to be pretty sort of imaginative with the use to actually make it really functional for you. So that would be my recommendation. Moving away from sort of traditional cardio methods and really focusing on sort of explosive, high intensity work with quick or short periods of recovery.
Well, that sounds like a very solid plan for someone looking to begin MMA, that kind of cardio training, because we're moving on to the strength kind of aspect with it as well, and focusing on the strength benefits that somebody might see when starting MMA or even progressing through at a higher level. Would you say is more core strength? Do they gain grip strength? What would you say are the main strength benefits of doing MMA?
All of the above. All of the above, yeah. I think the first thing you notice, especially when you start grappling, be it whether it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or wrestling, is the very physical nature of those type of martial arts. You know, so if you've never done anything like that before, the very act of being thrown on the floor, having to get back up, trying to find someone else on the floor, you know, trying to sort of battle for dominance, battle for position. If you've never done anything like that before, you know, within sort of 30 seconds to a minute, you're pretty much spent. You know, I mean, it doesn't really matter how fit you are. You can run marathons. You know, there's a certain fitness or purpose which you can only get from doing sort of continuous grappling. You know, I'm using grappling as a generic term for sort of wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, whatever else. And you know, and that's something you develop. You know, you develop that sort of core strength. You know, from wrestling, from fighting with someone all the time on the floor. You know, it gets easier. You know, and yeah, understandably, you know, you develop better grip strength, especially if you're someone who trains Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in a gi. You know, so yeah, I should probably reiterate, and you know, a lot of MMA guys also train a lot of the individual elements as well. You know, so as long as they sort of MMA training, they'll also train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in a gi. They'll also train sort of Thai boxing, whatever, also wrestling, so forth. So a lot of MMA guys are actually wearing a gi quite a lot. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu involves a lot of grip work, a lot of grip strength. You know, so naturally, that's a natural part of you which develops in terms of strength. And even when you're just wrestling without the gi, you know, just the very act of controlling someone's wrist, controlling someone's head, so on and so forth. Yeah, I mean, you develop certainly a lot of core strength, a lot of strength, and a lot more functional strength than, you know, because you kind of have to become strong, working in sort of angles and positions, you know, which you wouldn't be able to challenge yourself to do in a traditional sort of gym environment. So
yeah, because I remember, I think it must have been about 5 or 6 years ago, a mutual friend of ours, Eamon, I went to his class, and
good guy.
yeah, he's a good guy, and he's a very strong guy as well.
Yeah.
Especially for his size and weight, very, very strong. So I remember when I first got thrown around by him and a couple of guys in his class, you realise just how the guys who are more experienced and been doing it a while, just how strong they are in such close environment from doing it so often, and how much power and functional strength you can develop from something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I should probably add to that a bit as well with regards to when you first start off, you know, you're kind of like, you know, just fighting every second, every second. The more experience you get, the more you learn to breathe, and the more you learn to actually focus and go in bursts. So everything ties into, you know, what I was talking earlier about with regards to the training. Sort of, you go through periods of basically high intensity bursts. That's exactly the same with the grappling as it is with the striking. So one thing you do learn, you kind of learn to conserve your energy, you learn to conserve your strength, and you learn as to when to use it, when's a good time to use it, when's not a good time to use it. You know, so that's something else that comes from sort of the more experience of, you know, it doesn't really matter who you are. You know, if you're, you know, if you're going 100%, you know, just redlining it the whole time, you're not going to last very long. You know, so it doesn't really matter how long you've been sort of training for. You know, so that's your main advantage. Sort of experienced grapplers have, or MMA guys would have over someone who's not so experienced. It's the fact they actually know how and when to use their strength.
Oh yeah, that must.
You know, and that's a key factor.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be very, very useful, especially in a competition or something like that, being able to time your attack right.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to men versus women, do you train men and women at your club? Do you find big differences between men and women?
We have a few girls actually, and you know what, MMA is, I'm sure as you know, it's the world's fastest growing sport. Now, within that in itself, the women's area of MMA is probably experienced the biggest growth of anything else.
Oh wow.
So yeah, I mean, we certainly got a few girls, not many. I think it's still a sport in which, you know, for the most part, until it actually becomes real mainstream, you know, there's always going to be people who are a little bit nervous about the situation. And also, guys and girls in the MMA gym, we train together.
Okay.
You know, so it takes a certain woman to be able to kind of get over that initial thought of, you know, rolling around on the floor with a guy she doesn't know. You know,
Yeah.
so, but let me just say, I mean, for when they do actually get involved and when they do actually start, I mean, they're an absolute pleasure to train with and to work with, you know, because their work ethic, their ability to listen, and the sort of emphasis they put on technical detail, you know, is second to none. And as a result, you know, I mean, if you watch women's MMA, I mean, it's such a growth area that pretty much every show now is at least having a women's MMA match on the actual card. A lot go a lot further than that, where they've actually built a whole women's division now.
Oh wow.
It's got, yeah, I mean, the most obvious example is Invicta Fighting Championships, which is a show based in Kansas, I believe, in the USA. And it's fantastic. It's great matchmaking, some fantastic talents. And every time I've watched a match, I don't think I've seen a bad match on any of their shows.
Oh wow.
The women give it 100%. And the skill level is incredibly high. And yeah, sure, they might not necessarily have, as a rule, the sort of knockout power and speed of some of the high-level guys. But with regards to skill, and certainly with regards to dedication and sort of will to win, women's matches are some of the best matches you'll ever see. And probably the biggest star in MMA at the moment is a woman.
Oh
Ronda
wow.
Rousey. Yeah, Ronda Rousey, who's like an ex-judo Olympian who kind of crossed over into MMA, and you know, she's unbeaten. She literally just fought the weekend just gone, defending her title. But I mean, she's become so big and so mainstream. She's actually a bit of a darling of Hollywood as well.
Oh,
so she's
wow.
got movie offers coming in. You know, she started a few films, and yeah. So I think I went a little bit off track there. But if I was to pull myself back in, yeah, I mean, the women, they train with the guys. They do exactly the same stuff, and yeah, everyone mucks in together, and it's great having women. And there's more and more women becoming interested. I mean, I get emails, certainly probably once a week, from a different girl who's looking to join and looking to start MMA. So you can kind of see the crossover appeal and the fact that it's actually reaching a wider audience. Yeah, and girls want to try it out.
Well, that's fantastic. I had no idea that it was growing at such a large rate, especially in the female community of MMA. But it's good to hear that there's so many more girls branching out from just regular gyms, shall we say, to doing something a little more challenging, functional, and all round better for them in terms of health and fitness.
Yeah, absolutely, and they seem to love it.
Yeah, no, that's great. So in terms of beginners then, if there's you know, me as a beginner or anybody else as a beginner looking to get into MMA, what advice would you say is something that they should use to take forward?
The best thing to do, find a good club. You'll get an idea about what a good club is, because, you know, I'm assuming the first point of contact would be to search locally online to find a club close to you. From there, you know, don't just stop there and go down to the nearest one you see. Take the time out, you know, to go online, check out reviews, check out what people have said about it. Websites such as Google, Google Plus, and so on and so forth, and Google Places and everything else. You know, they're fantastic in terms of, you know, you do a search and normally there's reviews that come up on the first page of the search as well. You know, people talk about their experiences, so on and so forth. Check out their presence. Check out their sort of Facebook. You know, check out what sort of presence they have. Go onto the website, have a look at the instructor. You might not necessarily know, you know, too much about what their sort of credentials stand for, you know, but I think, you know, you can generally get a good idea just by looking at their sort of, you know, the instructors, also looking at some of the sort of team members there. what do they focus on? Does it look mainly like a keep fit place? Is that what I'm after? Is it like a place that produces fighters? If your objective is to actually get in there, then you'd obviously want to go somewhere which produces fighters, people who actually compete. From there, I'd say just go down there and turn up with your gear. I think that's the best way of getting involved. Don't be a wallflower. Don't stand at the side and kind of just get involved. I mean, chances are you're going to have fun. Any place worth training at, they'll look after you. You're not going to get bullied. You're not going to get knocked around. The most experienced people, often take the time out to help beginners. That's certainly the atmosphere and the ethos which we promote at our club, and I'm sure many others are the same. And yeah, I mean, I'd recommend just going down there, getting involved, but do your homework. Naturally, with the growth of the sport, there's a lot of great gyms around. I know plenty of great gyms around, but naturally, with the growth of the sport, you're going to have a sort of an infiltration of those gyms which are okay, not so good.
Yeah, of course. So if somebody's in
popularity, yeah.
So if somebody's in South London and they think, they like the look of you and they want to come down to New Wave Academy, do you take beginners, like real beginners, or
absolutely,
to be experienced?
Absolutely. I mean, the majority of our fighters start off as complete beginners.
Oh wow!
They've actually gone through the ranks and and trained and sort of dedicated themselves. But even if that's not your objective, the majority of members, they just want to train. They just want to get fit. They enjoy the atmosphere of the club. They enjoy the camaraderie, the laughter, the joking, and the hard work. If their objective is just to lose weight, it was to learn the techniques. That's perfect. And yeah, I mean, we've got complete beginners. We've got new beginners starting every single week, and everybody trains together. Everybody learns the same techniques, and beginners are welcome.
Oh, fantastic! If it's all right with you, then Colin, I'll put your details or the club's details in the description around this video, wherever it might be, and hopefully people get in contact with you and some guys and girls can start some MMA.
Oh, perfect. Sounds good.
Yeah. All right, that's great. Thanks, Colin. Thanks for doing that. We've been about 42 minutes now, so you're giving us some great information on mixed martial arts, kind of the history, how people can get started, what benefits it's got as well. So thanks for all the information you've given us today.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure. Thanks for contacting me.
So guys, I hope that's given you some good information on MMA training and how to incorporate it into your current workout if you're looking to get involved with some mixed martial arts. Once again, I want to thank Colin for the great information he's given off here, but don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.